When you talked about Jackson Pollock a second ago, I kind of jotted down a question. How much of a artist's work is tied to the person's kind of impact on the ethos of cultural, at the time? You said that when you were describing the Jackson Pollock paintings, you said, they were very important paintings. And I wanted to ask, why were they important? Like, what was there something tied into the culture? When I think about musicians, for example, and I think about guys like, Bob Dylan, okay, who is indicative of a certain time in American culture and a certain place in American culture. And so if you got a first edition, so-and-so of Bob Dylan, whatever, it's going to be worth a hell of a lot more than, of a first edition of an album that I put out, right? They're going to be starkly different. The tie there is into kind of the zeitgeist of the time. How much of that is true with art? Why'd you use the word important when you talked about Jackson Pollock's paintings?
So when we I guess in the art world, when we use the word important, we're generally referring to something called cultural significance, and I can talk about how that's defined. But specifically with Pollock was part of a movement called Abstract Expressionism in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s in the U.S., where that was the first time that artists started painting purely in a non-figurative way. So for hundreds of years, artists have been painting people, they've been painting things, and this was the first time in history that they started painting purely abstractly. So that was culturally significant. That had never been done before, and that led to all sorts of movements, both in art and architecture, after the 1940s or 1950s. So Pollock is regarded as a very culturally significant artist. Now, I would say one of the things that is interesting in today's art world is that there's some correlation, but there's not necessarily clear correlation between cultural significance and price. Meaning, there's a lot of artists that are cultural significant who have their markets just haven't really ever taken off. So they aren't, they aren't necessarily tied to each other.
Any names that I would know?
Well, we just recently did an offering for an artist named Sam Gilliam. And Sam's a living painter. I think he's in his 90s now. Very important African-American artist who was sort of doing these almost tie-dye like paintings in the late 60s, early 70s. And, his paintings were selling, I think 10 years ago for right around $10,000. Today they're selling for $1 million, which obviously is a huge jump. But compared to a lot of his peers, he's still, we believe, undervalued. His work's collected by every major museum, every major institution in the U.S. So we think he still has a lot of runway. But there's lots of examples of artists like Sam that exist.
So
who